那我现在呢，就先用中文来欢迎大家就是特别开心大家能参与今天的活动那我先做一个简单的背景的介绍我是任伟重点是在国内推广和实践对话。那我们为什么会组织这样子的一次活动呢？其实，对，其实呢也是我在研究这个对话领域的时候，其实也发现了我们今天的主讲嘉宾 Sarah， 为什么会发现她呢？是因为在早年的时候，我关注的我们对话领域的一位大师叫威廉伊萨克那他是彼得圣吉的同事做这个对话相关的研究。那早年 Sarah 呢，就是威廉伊萨克的同事这是一个很吸引我的一段经历那另外一个经历呢，就是另外一个经历呢，就是我曾经也跟英国的 Noel 中国的团队一起工作。那其实这是一个专门做创新对话领导力的一个组织发展的机构。那早年阿里巴巴在做组织发展的时候，也深得 Noel 的这个支持。那 Sarah 呢，其实也在 Noel 工作过若干年所以这是两段吸引我的经历。他的背景是有这个组织发展的心理学的这个专家，同时呢又深得对话。那我一直跟他有2本书，一本书就是 Have a Meaningful Conversation 另外一本书呢就是 Powered by Purpose。那同样他的Have a Meaningful Conversation 有很多这个对话在组织里实践的经验那另外一本呢，就是 Power by Purpose， 又跟我们现在在做的这个觉醒商业、商业向善就是非常有关。所以他做的这个事情和我现在在国内做的一些实践就是非常同频。所以我对他在国外做的一些实践就很感兴趣。于是呢，我就联系他，有没有可能因为他在国外是有相关的一些领导力和对话的训练的课程，那我就也想借机会把他的这方面的经验跟我们国内的实践者或者组织的领导者去分享，所以就有了我们今天的这样的一个分享的活动找了一个我们中国人可以用的时间也是方便他的时间。那 Claus 呢，我也是最近刚刚了解他，那他在这种正面领导力方面是有经验在领导力发展上，所以一会儿呢，他们也会简单的介绍一下。所以正面对话、使命，还有觉醒商业、商业向善，就是这些关键的词连在一起的时候，我发现都有很多的共鸣，也想借他们这次分享也把对这些有共鸣的伙伴聚在一起，我们一起来探索对话在组织里的应用就是推动这种社会的可持续的发展。那我就下面我就把这个时间交给 Sarah 和 Claus。Now welcome Sarah and Claus.
Thank you so much, Wei. Thank you very much for organising this session and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm in London where it's 10 o'clock in the morning, just after 10 o'clock, but I say good afternoon, good evening to you if you're in China. And so thank you for the introduction, Wei. I'm wondering, Claus, would you like to say hello at this stage and then I can take it from there?
Yes, my name is Claus and also very happy to be here. I'm not in London, I'm near Copenhagen, so it is a little past 11 here, also in the morning.
Thank you. So I'm going to share some slides in a moment and give you an overview of this session. There's lots that we want to cover with you, and we'd be happy to make the slides available to you after the session as well. So I'll come to the slides. Here we go. This session is all about having great conversations that build a purpose-driven business. And Claus and I want to share with you 3 secrets about how to unlock that dialogue. What we're going to cover in these 90 minutes that we've got together is taking a look at why dialogue is needed, the purpose mindset, questions that you could ask if you're going to have a conversation about purpose. And then you're going to have the opportunity to be in a breakout room and talk amongst yourselves, I would imagine, in Chinese about the input. And then we're going to have a second round of input. You'll hear more from Claus at this stage about how you can have a dialogue about purpose and about these 3 secrets. Again, the intention is you have a breakout room conversation, and then we'll come back at the end for a session where you could share your observations and ask questions, and that's our 90 minutes together. So if we come to this question around why is dialogue needed, many answers to this question, but in the context of building a purpose-driven business. And I just thought I'd start with a bit of a story that I have in my book, Powered by Purpose. I was given permission to share the story because it takes place at Standard Chartered Bank, and it was on a leadership program. Where I was part of the faculty delivering the programme at Said Business School at the University of Oxford. And you can see here, these are some of the comments from senior leaders at Standard Chartered Bank when this conversation about the purpose of the bank started to open up. And you can see here some people were very clear that the purpose of a bank is to make money. But there was a diversity of perspective, and you can see that other people were saying things like, well, actually, if it's just about making money and being profitable, that won't be inspiring for our customers. Other people saying, actually, it's about the people that are inspiring. At Standard Chartered Bank, there are many people who've got these rags to riches stories, and that's what's motivating, not pursuing profit maximization. But then other people were challenging that perspective and saying, don't move the goalposts. I've been in this organization for 20 years and I wouldn't be happy with that. So a tricky conversation. And it was also taking place in, let's say, a pressure cooker environment. Fintech developments were happening and impacting the business. Bill Winters, the CEO, wanted to create a culture of challenge. Anyway, I was part of these early dialogues. I got to observe, what does it take to have a dialogue about purpose? And what I found, just a few observations, is that to talk about purpose, you absolutely need a safe space that can hold the tension of different points of view, because there's likely to be conflict. It's likely to get a bit messy. It really helps to have a spirit of inquiry, people bringing their genuine curiosity, so they don't stay in a very fixed position, but they can open up to new thinking. And this overall mentality of not, let's fix this purpose thing, but let's have a conversation, let's have a dialogue and see what emerges. And what happened at Standard Chartered Bank was they did a whole series of engagement. They used machine learning and AI as well. I think they engaged about 70,000 people in the dialogue about purpose, and they crystallized it into this statement of driving commerce and prosperity through our unique diversity as the bank's purpose statement. And one of the benefits it brought was that they enabled themselves to retain top talent at a time of great turbulence, because people were engaged by the dialogue around purpose, and they felt some ownership of that purpose statement. That story is all there in my book, Powered by Purpose. There's a chapter on Make Dialogue Authentic. I'm also just going to reference a different case study in a book, and thanks to Claus, he introduced me to this, where it was about the Eden Project, and many of the observations I made about what it takes to talk about purpose are there in the academic literature as well. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but what this case study about the Eden Project showed, the Eden Project is an ecological centre in the southwest of England that has 1 million visitors a year. It's been very successful, but the project manager was saying we just had to keep on talking and talking and talking to build a shared understanding about our purpose, about our values. And you can see in that second quote, like everybody has a piece of the puzzle. They wanted to become this exemplar of sustainability. And again, it really required getting the right people in the room together with the right knowledge so they could figure it out together. And the only way they could figure it out together and become that exemplar of sustainability was through a dialogic process. And I refer you to this book and chapter 6 in this book for a great explanation of that process. And so one of the things I say in Powered by Purpose is that the purpose mindset, if we want to create more conscious capitalism, it's a fundamentally different mindset to the mindset of business as usual. And if I had to pick 4 key differences, this would be those: that we're shifting from a short-term mentality, maximizing profit, typically reducing cost, to a focus on longer-term well-being, societal well-being, serving not just our shareholders. Of course, shareholders are very important, but a much wider set of stakeholders that would include employees and team members, investors, maybe ESG investors, regulators, the local community, and so on. And it's this shift from maximizing profit at all costs to really putting people and the planet and the social purpose first. And it's about empowering people, not seeking to have power over people, but doing great work together. And what's exciting, and again, it's in my book, I'm not going to spend time on it here, but in the last 10 years, there is a growing business case that is demonstrating that leaders with this purpose mindset and organizations that embody this mindset are doing really well. They're getting strong financial results, as well as having people that flourish. And so if we're going to have a dialogue about purpose, we're asking a different set of questions, more existential questions, you could say, questions about, you know, what's our organization in business for? How do we differentiate ourselves? And that was a key part of the Standard Chartered Bank purpose statement. They want it to be distinctive to them as a bank. It's about having an honest conversation about both positive and negative impacts of the organisation on society, and as I say, attending to that wider set of stakeholders, the stakeholder ecosystem. And these questions are more fundamental, that they're at a different level than asking questions about next year's budget or the operational plan. And so if we come to a definition of dialogue, and thank you, Wei, for mentioning Bill Isaacs. I worked with Bill for 5 years, and this is how he describes dialogue. It's a conversation where we've got a real center and focus to it, rather than people taking sides and fixed positions. We take the energy of our differences, channel those differences towards something new that's not being created before, and we can lift out of polarization into a shared common understanding, common sense. And that coherence in the shared understanding gets us into coordinated and coherent action. So really, as I say in How to Have Meaningful Conversations, a dialogue is a co-creation. It's not about a leader making a proclamation about the purpose, for example, but really engaging people in a co-creative process of dialogue. And when it's an authentic dialogue, there's real human connection. There's people are willing to tell the truth. That might be uncomfortable. You would welcome challenge and dissent. And so there's an element of risk-taking and vulnerability, and therefore we really need that safe space that I spoke about that managed to be created at Standard Chartered Bank. And so we have some questions for you to take into a breakout room conversation in just a moment. And I'll copy these and put them in the chat for you as well, or maybe Wei could do that, but we'll put them in the chat, or Klaus could do that. So in your world, in your organisation, where do you see a need for better dialogue? What gets in the way of having that safe space for dialogue, and what could enable better dialogue to happen? So those are the questions that we invite you to have a conversation around.
So yes, so we're going to look a little bit about on how can you have dialogue about purpose, and we're going to focus in on 3 secrets that are very important to how you can have dialogue about purpose, and they're applicable to any dialogue really. So as you were writing in the chat, dialogue is needed everywhere, because dialogue is the tool for everything that's going on. No matter what you do in an organization, the tool you use is dialogue. So if you can upgrade dialogue, you can upgrade all processes. But we are going to focus on 3 ways of doing it, and we're going to focus on dialogues about purpose. So let me just see here. Yes, the first thing that we're going to talk about is this: how to increase productivity of any dialogue. And the model that Sarah and I are working with comes from a guy called David Kanter, one of the models that we are working with. And what he found was that in order to have very productive dialogues, the dialogue needs to contain 4 different kinds of speech acts. So 4 different kinds of statements that people are saying. And these speech acts are, some people have to make moves. And moves, that is, people have to propose something. If nobody proposes anything, then the dialogue will have no direction. There's nothing going to happen. We just sit and look at each other, right? Somebody has to come out and say, I think we need to do this. whatever this might be, because then we have a starting point for the dialogue. The next thing that's important in productive dialogues is that we have to have follows. So when people propose something, other people have to pick it up, follow, build on it. And if nobody does that, then there will be no completion. You probably all experience that kind of dialogue where you propose something, you put out a suggestion in the room and nobody picks it up, right? It just falls flat. And sometimes you have these dialogues where lots of people put in things, but because nobody picks it up, then you're not going anywhere with the dialogue. So this is important. The third speech act that you really need is oppose. So sometimes people will propose something and other people will follow it and say, this is a really good idea, and start implementing and looking at how can we unpack this. But of course, it's also very important that some people spot the problems with it, because without a position, there will be no course correction. If you don't oppose, you will just go with the first thing that somebody says, and then you will run that way. And potentially you can just all run off a cliff, right? If it was a bad proposition. So somebody has to spot the flaws and contribute by saying, well, this is a very nice proposition, but I see these potential dangers or potential mistakes or something like that. And that has to be added to the dialogue. Move, follow, oppose is already really good for dialogue, but we need a third or a fourth kind of speech act, and that is the bystand. So sometimes people have to be able to take a step back and see the bigger picture. And I think when we're talking about dialogues, about purpose, this is crucial. Even just bringing in considerations about purpose is like taking that bigger perspective. It is about seeing, well, how does what we are talking about now, how does that fit into a bigger societal order? How does it fit in with the purpose of the organization? So that's important. So without bystands, there is no perspective. So getting really good at bringing in the speech act is crucial. And here are some sentences. If you're in doubt of how to bring in the speech act, you can just have one of these sentences. You can simply just start by this. If you want to make a move, then just start a complete sentence. I suggest we talk about, or I think we should decide to, or my proposal is that we. You complete these sentences, you are making. I think there's a microphone open. Can we mute it? I don't know which one it is. If anybody can spot the open, there we go. Good. So, if you want to supply speech acts that are follows, it's very good to say something like, I agree with that, or I support that suggestion, or the classical yes and, right? You build on what is being said. Opposing, it's like I see things differently, or I would like to challenge that. I would like to play the devil's advocate. That's, if you complete those sentences, you're making opposes. And bystands is something like I noticed that, or maybe you see a dilemma, or maybe you just volunteer an observation that seems outside what we are already talking about. So to give you a little story about how this works, you can say, maybe I should say first, when you want to upgrade dialogue, it's a two-step process. First, you listen to the dialogue and you notice, are any of these speech acts missing? And if any of these speech acts are missing, you can either supply the speech act yourself, or you can invite somebody else to do it. We are all very comfortable with making certain speech acts, but not maybe other speech acts. And so it's nice to have the opportunity to say, well, maybe I'm not so comfortable opposing, but at least I can say something like, can anybody see a problem with what we are talking about now? And that's a way of inviting people to oppose. So to tell a little story about that will illustrate how spotting what speech acts are missing and introducing those speech acts can upgrade the dialogue. Once Sarah and I was working with a big government regulatory organization, and they were talking about their values, defining their values. And this is, of course, very closely related to purpose, right? We define our values, that's very closely related to purpose. And through a conversation, there was a lot of moves. They were proposing different values. There were some opposers saying, maybe not this value, maybe we should have this value. There were some follows, like building, like this is a really good one. I think we should also have this one. And what they came up with was the values of empowerment, collaboration, agility, excellence, and respect. So a very nice set of values that fits very well with being a government regulatory organization. So at some point in the dialogue, because there were not much bystands, they were very much in there sort of discussing which values should we pick, and let's come up with a list of 5 good ones and so on. At some point, some of them says, hang on a sec. When I look at what collaboration means to us in practice, it means that we ensure that everybody sees everything and that everybody is given a chance to comment on everything, even if they're not particularly experts in the area. And that takes a lot of time. So if we put in the collaboration as a value in the way that we understand it in practice, that might have a bit of a tension with the value of agility, because we're not going to move very fast if that's how we collaborate. And that then sparked a deepening of the conversation. Rather than having these abstract concepts alone, they had to start saying, okay, so fine, collaboration is a value, but which kind of collaboration? What do we mean by collaboration? What kind of collaboration will be compatible with the value of agility? And that really deepened the conversation. And so from that, you can say, it's very interesting for you to think about these kind of things, right? It's like, how is your organization's purpose understood, not just at the abstract, but in terms of practical behavior? And does that lead to internal inconsistencies between different parts of your purpose? These are the kind of questions that can really fuel great dialogue. And the Eden project that Sarah was talking about is a great case story for how you really deepen your understanding of your purpose and your organization's purpose and values through that kind of considerations. Good. So the second secret is how to save valuable time. Many times people say the reason we don't have dialogue is because we're busy. We don't have time for dialogue. And so that is one of the main objections. Even just when you consider upgrading your dialogue skills, maybe you feel, well, it would be really nice to upgrade my dialogue skills, but I'm so busy. I have all these deadlines. I have all these things I really need to deliver. And it can be difficult to find, or it can seem difficult to find time to develop your, to have your dialogues and to develop your dialogue skills. And here it's really good to take a broader perspective, a bigger picture, because of course it's true that developing dialogue skills and having dialogues take a lot of time, but it is also true that not having dialogues take a lot of time. So think about here, you can say the time you spend on having dialogue includes, you need to build rapport, you need to build good connections, you need to learn the skills, you need to design maybe a session, think about like how to facilitate the dialogue, you need to prepare materials and so on. So there is it takes time to have good dialogue, for sure. However, it can take a lot longer not to have dialogue. Think about all the having to manage the resistance that is the result of not having had sufficient dialogue, or navigating difficult conflicts, dealing with misunderstanding, wasted work when you think you agree on what to do, and then you go out in your different departments and you work really hard, and then you come back together only to discover you were not in agreement at all about what to do. Had you spent 5-10 minutes longer to really get on the same page, you wouldn't have wasted maybe a week or a month or even longer of work. And so to illustrate this, I have a very nice little story from it was a multinational transportation company. So they move packages around, and part of what they need to do when they move packages around is when packages come from outside the EU, there needs to be customs declarations before you can deliver the package. And they have to be done very fast because everybody wants like same-day delivery, even if it's delivered from the US or something like this, right? So it's a very intense work environment there. And this particular company, they had a problem. They used, of course, a lot of software. They fill out the application form, they send it to customs. In Denmark, you can't send a custom declaration form to be cleared before the package is on Danish soil. So that means from the plane lands and until the package come to the arrive at the hub, that's where you have your window of time for making the declaration and having it approved for being delivered to the customer. So very pressured. And there was a certain type of parcels that the program didn't clear it correctly. So the people had to spend a lot of hours doing the whole thing manually instead of relying on the software. They had tried to explain this to industrial engineering for a very long time, and they tried to solve it, and single time they thought, now we've solved it, then it wasn't solved anyway. And this had been going on for years. You can imagine how much time people had spent on doing the process manually instead of using the software, on creating tickets for the industrial engineering department, on trying to solve tickets and all these kind of things. At some point, the head of IE comes to Copenhagen, and I insist that he goes and meet the people in the custom declaration department, the people who are doing the thing. And I insist that they sit down in front of the computer and show him on the screen what it is that's wrong. It took literally 10 minutes. He comes over to me and says, Claus, now I get it. And then it got solved, right? 10 minutes of dialogue. And if they had only done that years earlier, they could have saved thousands of hours. So that dialogue takes time. Sure, it does. But you can save a lot of time having dialogue as well. And this is why it's so important to upgrade your skills in having dialogue so that you can have the kind of dialogue that it can really save a substantial amount of time in your organization. So, and in this case, the facilitation of dialogue was really, it was about one thing, getting the right people together in the room. That was all. I didn't have to do anything more than that. But there was pushback, right? The head of IE for Europe, he's a busy guy. And he several times he said, can we skip this session? And I said, no. And it was good that we didn't skip it. Good. So the third secret we want to share with you is how dialogue turns difficult people into valuable assets. We all know them. We all know the kind of people that we dread having dialogues with because they have a viewpoint that's very different from ours. And it seems that they are unable to listen to reason, right? We have all the good arguments. We know that we are right. And somehow they skillfully ignore all of it. And how do you have conversations with those kind of people? Now, before we talked about the 4 different kinds of speech acts, another model that Sarah and I work with in our workshops is a model from Isaacs. And this is a model that shows how, in order to get good at the 4 different kinds of speech acts, you have 4 different kinds of practices. And of course, we don't have time to comment on all the practices, but to make moves, you have to be good at voicing. So share what you see from your unique vantage point. To follow, you have to be really good at listening. To build on somebody else's idea, you have to understand what that idea is. And that means you have to sort of set aside your reactivity and your own impulses. You also have to listen to your own impulses, otherwise you cannot set them aside. And then you have to get what is it the other person is talking about. Then to oppose well, you have to respect. That means you have to engage in helping your opponent formulate their point of view, right? The natural instinct is to say, no, I have to tell my opponent why their point of view is wrong. But actually, it's a wonderful practice to say, can I formulate the opponent's point of view even better than they can, even more persuasively than they can? That's very good practice. And to suspend, you have to be able to question what you see as natural and obvious. When we're talking about turning difficult people into valuable assets, we're talking about getting really skilled at opposing. And that means we're talking about developing the capacity for respecting. To develop the capacity for respecting, it's kind of a mindset thing. We have to have the mindset that when people say something, even if it sounds completely strange to us, sometimes people say something that really sounds bonkers to us and factually wrong. Still, we have to understand that it is possible to have a certain kind of experience that will lead you to holding that position with integrity. It isn't necessarily because it's not because they want to be deceptive. It's not because they're stupid. There is something more to it. So having that willingness to accept, they know something I don't know, and there's something to it. When they say it, there's something to it. There's a nugget of gold somewhere. The second thing that's important is to understand you cannot understand everything that their viewpoint, because you are not them. That will keep your ears open. That will prevent you from the trap where you say, yes, I understand how you would see it like that, but what you don't understand is, and then you're back in the opposition. So we really want to be able to oppose with respect, and through that we avoid the trap of fruitless polarization and this kind of entrenchment war where everybody's just pushing for their own point of view and actually not listening to the other. So a story to show a little bit how this works is, once I was working with an organization, and this organization was, their purpose was to go out into schools, elementary schools, and generate dialogue between teachers and students and parents about alcohol consumption. The reason for this is that there's a lot of research that shows if you postpone children's debut in alcohol consumption, you solve a whole range of societal issues. So it's really good to go out and help schools have clear policies on this. And because if you're a parent and you want to put clear boundaries on your child's use of alcohol at parties, school parties and stuff like that, then if the different parents in the school have different ways of going about it, it can be very difficult to put strict boundaries if all the others have no boundaries and so on. So this is why they wanted to generate this kind of dialogue. And the people there, they said, when we're out, we have solid research, we know it's a good idea to have clear boundaries, all these kind of things, but we always meet a certain kind of person. So this is their the kind of person that's really difficult for them to have a dialogue with. And they characterize this person. They say, it's somebody who will say, I started drinking when I was 6 or 7 or whatever, very young age, and it never did me any harm. And the next thing they will say is, I don't believe in the research. I think the research is biased and flawed. They don't have anything to back up that claim, but they just don't believe it. And then they say, and by the way, look at, let's say, Jenny's parents. She has the strictest parents, and she's the one that drinks the most at parties. So it doesn't make any sense to put down clear boundaries. And they were despairing. They were saying, like, how can we, they won't listen to reason. How can we have a constructive dialogue with this kind of person? And so we said, okay, let's practice the respecting. Let's listen to what they're saying and assume that it comes from a place of integrity. And especially when you listen to the last bit that they're saying, that integrity is revealed. When they say, well, Jenny's parents are the strictest parents and she drinks the most, when you listen to that, you can see, what they are coming from is a really valid concern about damaging the relationship to their children. Because if they damage the relationship to their children, they lose influence over their children. And I think we can, when we talk about organizations, we can see this, right? And when you manage people, sometimes you have to shoot down people's pet projects. How do you do that in a way without damaging the relationship? So the moment we saw that, the dialogue really deepened, because now it's not just about what kind of boundaries should you set for your children. It's like, what kind of boundaries should you set and how should you set them in a way that preserve the relationship, which is a much more interesting question to have a dialogue around. And so I think 2 lessons from this are really important. The first lesson is the organization's espoused purpose was to create dialogue, but that was not their real purpose. Their real purpose was to ensure that the debut of alcohol consumption was postponed for young people, but they didn't say that. And then they had to have a reflection on, like, okay, so if that is our real purpose, that should be part of what we are saying, right? We need to know that that is our real purpose. It also helped them modify their real purpose. They said, well, actually, it's not just about setting clear boundaries. It's about setting clear boundaries that also preserve the relationship. And so both, this is important, right? And you can ask yourself these questions. Are your espoused purpose, the purpose the thing that you say is the purpose of your organization, is that actually also your actual purpose? When you look at your behavior, does your behavior show that there is a match between your actual purpose and your espoused purpose? And if you find discrepancies, that's not a bad thing. That just means you have a wonderful starting point for really fruitful dialogue. And the second thing that you can think about is, when there are people who say something that you think is really strange in your conversation about purpose, does that point to your purpose needing to be modified in some way? Are they onto something? Even if they cannot formulate it very eloquently, maybe they're still onto something. Maybe they know that we need to modify our purpose in some way or another. And that is also a very fruitful starting point for dialogue. Good. So again, we are going to invite you out into breakout rooms. And here are some questions that you can talk about in the breakout rooms. What resonates for you about the 3 secrets that we've talked about to have great dialogue? The thing about making sure that all 4 speech acts are present, making sure that focusing on the bigger picture so that you can see how much time you can save, rather than focus narrowly on the time you need to spend to have good dialogue. And thirdly, what we were talking about here, like what's a conversation that you and your stakeholders need to have about purpose? Are there conversations that would be good to have, but you're not having them? So these are the questions we'll invite you to consider in the breakout rooms.
Before all the team members come here, maybe I can raise up one of my questions. You can answer it later. We have a good discussion, especially we talk about how to turn difficult people into a dialogue. Yeah. We discussed a case, but we found one of our team members contributed his valuable opinion, seeing awareness of the person, to awareness his dialogue style or her style of the dialogue need to do some changes, but it needs some skill. If you have any skill in this area, we would like to hear from you. Thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you, Sophia. And you're very welcome to type the question in the chat as well. Let me gather my thoughts. Claus, do you want to take it from here? Now people are back.
Oh, yes. Good.
Thanks, Claus.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, thanks for the question, and this we now have like a few minutes just to wrap up. We're very curious about hearing what you discussed, your learnings, and if you have any particular questions, you can ask them or you can put them in the chat. And I think we talked about, if we don't get to answer all the questions, if there are questions we don't get to answer, maybe we'll give a little bit of an answer to them when we send out the link to the recording, and so it's worth putting it in the chat anyway. So good. So, but I don't know, Sarah, do you want to start by?
Yeah.
Do you have a comment to Sophia's question?
Well, one of the things that you remind me of, Sophia, with your question is sometimes small things can make a difference in dialogue and to the atmosphere that's in a meeting room. So one quick example would be to, again, it's spending the time to have a check-in. So asking a question at the start of the meeting and hearing from everybody in the room, if that's possible, not just the most senior person. So a question might be, what would be a great outcome from this session for you or for us as a team, to just get some conversational turn taking, getting some participation going. So the most senior person or the most extrovert person doesn't dominate the conversation. That's an example of a small change that can make a big difference. Yeah.
Good, thanks. I see there's another question here. What is the relationship between model 1 and model 3? I assume that is the model of the speech acts and the model of the skills. And it's a good question because they are built on each other. Model 1 is kind of the diagnostic tool. So this is like, what are the kind of sentences that need to be said? And then you can hear if there's a certain type of sentences that's missing. So are people making moves, follows, opposes, and bystands? The third model is more relating to saying, okay, but what are the skills you need to develop to deliver effective moves, effective follows, effective opposes, and effective bystands? So for example, we were talking about how it's important to make opposes, and that would be saying sentences like, I see things different from you. I see it this way. To play the devil's advocate, I'll do this. The model 3 focuses on what are the kind of skills that you need to have in place so that you can deliver those kind of speech acts in a way that's really effective. Because you can deliver those kind of speech acts in ways that will just polarize the field and not necessarily contribute to great dialogue.
Thank you, Klaus. And there's a number of other questions in the chat. I know we won't have time for all of them. But questions around how to build a trusting relationship with employees, how to encourage people to feel empowered to express their ideas without hesitation. In dialogue work, we sometimes talk about the quality of the environment or the container that holds the conversation, and paying attention to levels of safety. The quality of the container makes a big difference. I already spoke in response to Sophia's question about using a check-in, bringing all the voices in. Setting some ground rules can also be really helpful. So for example, you're free to pass. We hope you'll respond to all the questions, but you're free to pass. And that can help people relax. And another ground rule I often use is welcome uncomfortable moments. You know, they might come up, they might not, but there's often deeper learning in the discomfort. So let's not shy away from the discomfort, but let's actually lean in and take a deeper breath and trust that we'll get through the discomfort, because the conversation becomes more real and more honest when there's discomfort in the room. So that's a couple of thoughts on those questions. Klaus, do you want to pick up on any of the questions? Or?
Yes, there's another one here, how to get buy-in from leaders believing in the value of dialogue. And this is, of course, if time and resources have to be allocated to it, you want buy-in from leaders. And I can see somebody has already put in here, like show the leaders the comparison between spending time on dialogue versus not spending time on dialogue. And I think that's a very good answer. I think it's a lot about if you can show the effects of dialogue and start small, right? Having something, and then you can tell stories like, we had this kind of problem, we had this dialogue, this happened in the dialogue, this was the result of it in terms of something that the manager or the leader cares about. And then gradually you will get more legitimacy for the dialogue practice. And yeah. And I think a lot of dialogue practice, also just to speak a little bit to the how to build trust, it's the same kind of thing. If you are very good at respecting opposition, for example, then people will slowly see that they can oppose a little bit and that it has positive results. And then that trust will build. But it's a process. It's something that comes over time. Like Sarah says, it's like you can't just decide now we're going to have that very honest and open dialogue. It's really from consistently building and nurturing the container, which is also some of the things that we talk a lot about at our courses on dialogue. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Klaus. I'm really mindful of the time. We're at the 90-minute mark. So just going to say a very big thank you for choosing to be here, for your participation, for your questions, your learning, your comments. You're welcome to stay in touch with us. You can find us on LinkedIn as one place, and a huge thank you to Wei for convening this session and drawing you to it. So Wei, I don't know if you're still here with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Do you want to have the final words here, Wei? Over to you.
Okay. I invite everyone to put one word or one sentence in the chat box to do a checkout about today's session. Okay. Valuable, empowered. 其实我也I speak in Chinese， 就是其实这两位老师，尤其是 Sarah 呢，他2本书我挺惊讶，都在中国有出版，所以我鼓励大家可以有机会去了解。 因为他们的实战呢，基本上都是在商业组织里面，同时又跟商业向善有关。我其实是关注了他在国外的一些课程那其实基本上都是不太友好我们中国的时间所以如果大家感兴趣的话，我们其实是可以组织一个类似于组团学习的机会就是把 Sarah 他们围绕这个对话以及和这个就是深度对话在组织里围绕这个使命 purpose 的这个他们的实践完整的课程可以引入到国内，就像我们做一个就是组团学习如果大家在这方面有兴趣的话，可以联系我。这样的话，当我觉得有那么一个种子伙伴的话，那我就可以向 Sarah 发出这个邀请，我们就可以去创造一个共学的机会去年我是组织了一场 BOM 对话的机会，那今年呢，我们现在在做 Word Cafe 的，那我也希望未来我们可以把 Sarah 和Claus 他们在商业组织的这种对话的实践，也可以跟我们国内的伙伴做分享这是我向大家发出的一个邀请感兴趣的伙伴可以联系我。Okay, again, thank everyone's sharing. I just Sarah, Claus, do you have some words? I've finished. I invite them to think about a future program with you. Yeah, if they have some interest, they can contact me. So we can, if we have a group of a team, people who are interested in the program, we can plan for it.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that comment that says, thanks to you, Wei, you're the super connector here. And it feels like that. So thank you again. And a couple of things that really resonate in the chat. Start with small things, absolutely. And start with yourself as well. I think if we're more open, it encourages other people to be more open. So thank you. I'm loving, I'm just still reading the chat, but thank you very much. And Claus, the final word from you.
Yes, thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks, Wei, for making it happen. It was very nice, and I hope to see a lot of you on for further dialogue.
好，谢谢大家那希望大家就去多多实践，然后我们保持联系，好吧？好，谢谢大家。
Thank you.
大家也可以打开你的摄像头，打开你的话筒，也可以用发出你的声音。
See you. See you.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Great.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.